Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be reading Diary of the Wimpy Kid, The Deep End, the new book. I just got it a couple of days ago, so I haven't really read it yet. So here it goes. Thursday. I love my family and all, but I don't exactly need to spend 24 hours a day with them, 7 days a week. And that's exactly the way it is around here lately. It's not just me who's getting tired of this either. We're all going a little nuts. And if things don't change soon, I think we're going to go off the deep end. Mum says we've cooped up for too long, and we just need a holiday from each other. But what we really need is a holiday from each other. That's not going to happen anytime soon, though, because we don't have any money. And the reason we don't, it's a kind of long story. We've been living in Grandma's basement for 2 months, and I don't know how much longer we can keep going like this. Mum says that one day we'll look back on this time and smile, but she's not the one who has to share a function with Roderick every night. The crazy thing is, Grandma's got plenty of room in her house, so I don't understand why our whole family is staying in the basement. When we first got here, I called dibs on the guest room, but Grandma said it was already taken. I don't think Grandma's too thrilled that we're living with her, because whenever her friends come over, she asks us to stay out of sight. And that's kind of inconvenient, since there isn't a bathroom in the basement and her friends stay forever. We can't use the kitchen when Grandma's got guests, which means we can't eat dinner until after they're gone. But last night, I guess Roderick got sick of waiting, so he heated up some leftover pizza in Grandma's dryer. There's no TV in Grandma's basement, so the only thing we've got to entertain ourselves with is each other, and believe me, that's not enough. Mum says being bored is good, because whenever you're bored, it makes your imagination work. But whenever I try it, I always end up imagining the same old thing. Something that's making the situation a lot harder is that Dad has to work from home, and this summer, which means he's always around. And whenever Dad has a meeting, the rest of us have to pretend we're not there. But that's always easy to do. Not always easy to do, especially when you've got a 3-year-old in the family. Most of the time, I just try and keep myself busy. Grandma's got stacks of puzzles down in the basement, and I've done a few of them by myself. But Mum always lets Manny put the last piece to make him feel important. If you ask me, I don't think Mum's doing Manny any favours by babying him, and it's not got a lot worse since we've started living at Grandma's. Sometimes, after dinner, we'll play a board game as a family, but Manny can't handle complicated rules, so we always end up playing the same old game that doesn't require any skills. We have to go to bed before it's even dark outside, because we're on Manny's schedule. These days, Manny's favourite bedtime story is a Noah Ark picture book. It's about this guy who hears it's going to rain for a really, really long time, so he builds a giant boat to ride out into the storm with a bunch of animals. The illustrations in Manny's book are all cartoons, and they make it look like a flood wiped out the whole earth. It was kind of fun. But I guess the drawings weren't more realistic. Parents wouldn't buy it for the preschoolers. I've got some questions about Noah Ark's story. For starters, I want to know why Noah let venomous creatures like snakes and scorpions on board. Because if it was me, I would have used the opportunity to leave a few of those guys behind. And then I could have used the extra space for more good animals like puppies and hedgehogs and those pygmy hippopotamuses. Luckily, Noah didn't have to make room on board for the whales and fishes, because they would have taken up a lot of space, and they'd probably didn't even know the flood was happening to begin with. But it doesn't make a lot of sense that Noah just let birds onto the ark, since they could have just flown, and I bet he regretted that decision right away. You only hear about the animals that survived the flood, but sometimes I wonder if there were some cool animals that didn't make it onto the boat. The way the story goes, after it rained for 44 days and 40 nights, it took 150 days for the water to go back down. That means Noah was stuck on the boat with a bunch of animals, plus his wife and 3 sons. And whenever I feel sorry for myself living in Grandma's basement with my family, I think about Noah, and it makes me feel a little better. Mum keeps saying she's glad we're all together right now because she feels like time has slowed down. I've noticed that too. But for me, it's not a good thing. Walrus. Some things that's making this summer really long is that I can't go to my friend Rowley's house, and that's because he's off doing some big European holiday with his family. When Rowley first told me about his family plans, I tried to see if his parents might let me tag along, but I guess Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson aren't sharp, as I thought they were, because they never picked up on my hints. I'll bet your trip would be a little more fun if you had a friend along. Yep, I wonder who might like to come. So now Rowley's probably having the time of his life while I'm doing a 500-piece puzzle in my grandma's basement. I think Mum feels bad that we can't afford to do anything special this summer, so she's been trying to make up for it. She says we can go anywhere we want, just use our imagination. But to be honest, that's not really doing it for me anymore. I think Mum's finally had enough too. Last night, she called a family meeting after dinner to brainstorm ideas for holidays. That we can't afford. But the problem is, everyone's got their own ideas for a good time. Dad wants to drive around and visit a bunch of Civil War battlefields and take part in reenactment. But nobody else was crazy about putting on wet underwear in the middle of August. Manny wants to go to the animal safari park, which we used to visit a lot. When I was little, but the animals in that place seemed so sad, especially the donkey painted to look like a zebra. Mum said we could save money by staying close to home and visiting places in our own community. But I've gone on enough field trips to feel like I know this town inside out. For the only ones who agreed on what we should do were me and Roderick. We both voted to go to the Thrills and Spills amusement park, which would be cheap since Grandma got half-price coupons at the mail. Plus, they just opened a new roller coaster called Track Jumper, supposed to be totally insane. Mum said the rides at Thrills and Spills were too scary for Manny, so she suggested go to Storybook Village, which has a lot of rides for all ages. But me and Roderick had enough of Little Miss Muffet rides for a lifetime. Since my family couldn't settle on anything, I suggested we go on our own holidays and do a slideshow on everyone's trips when we get back. Mum said the whole point of being on a family holiday is to do things together. She says one day us kids are going to separate ways, and time's running out to make happy memories as a family. Believe me, for this to make a happy memories together, it's going to take a miracle. We finally figured out a way we could afford to go on a family holiday this summer. On Saturday night, my great-grandmother Gammy called Dad and asked if he could get rid of Uncle Gary's camper van, which had been parked in her driveway for the past 2 years. Apparently, Uncle Gary ran off to work as a radio clown, and she doesn't think he's coming back anytime soon. At first, Dad was mad because he's always cleaning up Uncle Gary's mess. But Mum said the camper van would be a solution to our holiday problems. Mum said the reason holidays are so expensive is because staying in hotels and eating at restaurants costs lots of money. She said the camper vans would take care of both of those things. Then Dad started getting excited. He said we could hit the open road and we could stop for the night whenever we feel like it, and we could cook for ourselves too. All I knew is me and my brothers were so happy for the chance to get out of Grammy's basement that we would agree to anything. Mum says we'll have a lot of adventure along the way, and I'm getting kind of excited about the trip too. In fact, I'm actually starting to feel a little bad for Ollie, because while he's stuck in a boring museum on the other side of the world, I'm gonna be off doing something really wild. For the past 2 days, I've been getting ready for our holiday, and I'm a little worried that Mum's hoping to turn this into an educational trip. But believe me, the last thing I'm planning to do is learning. Yahoo! Wednesday. This morning, we went to the grocery store and stocked up some food for the trip. Then we went to the camping superstore to get everything else we're going to need. I was pretty excited because we've never actually bought anything in the camping store. Dad used to take me and Roderick there when we were little, but that was just to kill some time on a Saturday morning. When we got to the store today, Dad went around, picked some basic supplies like lanterns and flasks and camping chairs, but I went straight to the section in the store with the high-end gear because I figured if we were doing this thing, I want to be comfortable. I picked out an inflatable pull-out sofa and hiking boots with little fans built into the heels, plus a solar-powered blender that I can make a cherry slushy in 30 seconds. Dad said those things weren't serious campers, thought, and made me put them back. Dad said we were going to live off the land as much as possible on this trip, and he picked out a few more fishing rods. Well, I don't know anyone else, but the only fish I eat comes in the shape of a stick. Manny and Roderick got really excited about the idea of catching our own food, so they went off to get their own gear. But Mum stopped them before they could get too carried away. Roderick was pretty disappointed. I guess he was planning on to do some trophy hunting while we were on the trip, and was hoping to decorate the kitchen when our house was finished. After Dad was done shopping, he was ready to check out, but I think Mum was nervous that we weren't getting the kind of equipment, so she asked a salesperson to look over our stuff and see if we had anything we needed. Well, this guy must have been a wilderness survival expert or something, because he had a lot to say, and none of it made me feel confident about going on the camping trip. The salesman said the number one thing we needed to worry about was bears, because there were a ton of them in the places we were going. But he said there were just a few things we could do to protect ourselves just in case. The salesman said the first thing we need to remember is always tie up the trash and hang it into a tree so it would be out of reach for bears. And he said if we really wanted to be safe, we should buy a jug of wolf wee and spray it around the camp every night because it scares the bears off. I tried to imagine whose job it is to collect wolf's pee, and I promised myself I start getting better grades in school so it doesn't end up being me. The salesman said the other thing we need to worry about was bugs like mosquitoes and ticks. So we should always put plenty of bug spray. I was totally on board with that idea because one time Albert Sandy told everyone at our lunch table about this kid who fell asleep outside and got sucked dry by a mosquito. And that sounds like a pretty bad way to go for me. I was started to get a little nervous when the salesman told us everything else we needed. He said we had to have a first aid kit in case someone got injured, and waterproof matches just in case our gear got wet, plus we needed compass just in case we got lost, a snake bite kit for if someone got bitten, a flare gun if things really got bad. By the time we paid, I was a little shook up, and I have to admit, Grandma's basement didn't seem so terrible anymore. I think the guy at the camping store stressed Dad out, because after we paid for our stuff, we kind of just rushed out of there. And we were halfway home before realising Roderick was missing, and we had to go back. After that, we drove to Gammy's house to pick up Uncle Gary's camper van. I guess Dad had thought it was pretty much ready to go, but it was a total mess inside. I remember Dad telling me when Uncle Gary got his first car, he used to keep a bunch of garbage inside it so no one would steal it. Well, I think Uncle Gary done the same idea with the camper van. When we spent a whole afternoon clearing it out, and I wouldn't have been too surprised if we actually found Uncle Gary buried somewhere underneath all the trash. Once we got the junk out of there, we were finally able to take a good look around the camper van. I could see how Uncle Gary was able to live in there for 2 years, because it had everything a person could need. There was a stove, a sink, a kitchen table, a little refrigerator, plus there was a bathroom with a shower in it, and some extra space above the cabin for sleeping. We scrubbed everything down, but each time we thought we were finished cleaning, we could find something else Uncle Gary left behind. And I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I seriously hope Uncle Gary brought a new pair of underwear since he moved out. Gammy gave us some sandwiches to take with us, and we hit the road. When we started off, Dad was super excited about the camper van. He said he could work anywhere he wanted now. We could live on the road until our house was finished, and maybe even longer. Mum chimed in. She said we could travel around the country and record our adventures. Then we could become one of those families who got famous on the internet. Getting Around with the Heffleys, featuring Manny. Like and subscribe. It was actually starting to get into the whole camp lifestyle too. Mostly, I just thought it was cool that I could use the toilet while we were cruising down the highway. The only thing I don't like about Uncle Gary's camper van is that it didn't have seatbelts in the living area, which was a problem. Whenever Dad hit the brakes, oof. When traffic slowed down, Mum let Manny sit in the driver's seat so he could feel like he was driving. But I think she realised it was a mistake when he started laying into the horn. Honk! La, 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 la. It was cool being out on the open road, but after a while everything started to kind of look the same. So me and Roderick went on our gadgets to pass the time. After an hour or so, Mum said we'd had enough of screen time for a day, and we needed to turn off our electronics. Usually Mum tells us we've had enough screen time, we'll take a break. But as soon as she stops paying attention, we'll get right back on. And after a while, she got tired of fighting us and just give up, which is what we thought would happen today. Bleep, bleep, bleep. It turns out Mum wasn't messing around on this trip. When we got back on our devices, she put them in a clear plastic box that had a timer on the top. The second I saw that thing, I knew it was what it was, because I'd seen it in the ads of one of Mum's parenting magazines. The Vault. Ends screen time, debates for good. Fits phones and most tablets. Bulletproof glass. Sets timers from 10 minutes to 10 years. Mum set the timer for 2 hours. Then went back to our seat in the front. However made that new thing was we were doing, because me and Roderick couldn't figure out how to crack it. Boink. Rattle. Mum handed us some activities she'd created for the trip. She said they should keep us busy for a while, but it wasn't that much fun playing wildlife bingo when we couldn't even identify half the animals we saw alongside the road. Another hour or two of driving, Mum and Dad started looking for places to stop. There were some signs for science attractions, so Dad pulled over at the exit for a place called Cupin's Ravine. Mum's got all excited because she said like we were an explorer who were like about to see something new. But unfortunately, some other explorers beat us to it. We couldn't find any parking, so we had to move along. And it was exactly the same story for the next 3 places we tried to stop. I know I should feel lucky to be alive at some time, but there's modern medicines and smart watches and peanut butter filled pretzels. But sometimes I wish I was born a little sooner so I could have a chance to actually discover something. Because when you find something new, then they name it after you. But by now, everything was worth finding has already been discovered. And you wouldn't really want your name on any other stuff that's left over. Greg's ditch. One time, at the planetarium in our old town, they had a fundraiser, and if you paid $10, you'd get a certificate that said a planet in some faraway galaxy was named after you. So Mum paid the $10. I still have the certificate hanging on my red wall in my bedroom. Planet H1 _ B9932 in the universe galaxy, will hereby known as Planet Greg. But when Mum filled out the form, I wish she'd put my first and last name on it, because now some random Greg could get the planet before I do and say it's his. Dad said our mistake was that we were going to places everyone knew about, and if we got off the main road we might find something special. So we took a director and kept our eyes peeled for anything that looked like it was worth stopping for. And sure enough, after we took a few more turns, we found crystal clear lake with nobody in sight. The air conditioning in Uncle Gary's camper van wasn't working, and everyone was ready to cool off. So we got our swimming gear and took a dip in the lake. It took a second to realise something wasn't right. I noticed a million shimmering objects just beneath the surface, and my mind went right to piranhas. I'm pretty sure everyone else's did too. I was almost at the shore when I felt a bunch of tiny mouths nibbling at me. Shriek! I thought I was being eaten alive, and by the time I made it out of the water, I was surprised to be in one piece, or almost in one piece. I had a scab on my knee where I got into the water, but by the time I got out, it was totally picked clean. Just then, a truck pulled up, and two guys inside looked angry. That's when we found out the lake we were swimming in, was fish hatchery. I think those guys were about to call the cops on us for trespassing, and we didn't want to stick around to find out. So we piled into the camper van, and Dad stepped on the gas. The next time Mum made us fish for dinner, I'm definitely going to check the package to see where this came from first. The crazy thing is, the fish hatchery wasn't the last place we got chased away from today. We tried parking a camper van in the meadows so we could get out and enjoy the view while we ate, but it turned out to be somebody's farm. We finally found a field that didn't look like it belonged to anyone, so that's where we stopped for the night. The sleeping situation wasn't great. The kitchen table converted into the bed, which is where Mum and Dad slept. I wasn't crazy about the idea of eating breakfast off the spot where Dad slept in his boxer shorts. I had to share the loft above the cabin with Roderick, which wasn't much of an improvement on our deal in Grandma's basement. The only person who had any space to himself was Manny. He turned one of the cabinets into a kitchenette, into a little apartment, and he set up. It was actually sweet. While Mum and Dad were getting ready for bed, I found a major downside to the camper van. The bathroom walls were paper thin, and with everything, the engine was off. You could hear everything happening in there. And trust me, no kid wants to hear his mother's bathroom noises. Bubbles, bubbles. I can't hear anything that's happening right now. La 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 la. It turns out the place we stopped for the night was a public park. Little leisure practice started first thing in the morning, and we were parked right over the pitcher's mound. Luckily, we were able to take off before some kid broke a tail light in direct hit. Mum said she didn't want a repeat of yesterday and asked everyone to think of something that we could do that was guaranteed fun. And that's when I remembered the billboard I saw the day before. The billboard was for a place called the Family Adventure Centre. Usually, whenever the word family is part of something, it's warning to stay away. But the pictures on the sign made me think this place could be different. We had to backtrack about 2 hours to find the Adventure Centre, but it didn't really matter since we were already heading anywhere to begin with. I had to say, this place was pretty cool. There were a million of activities, and I wanted to do them all. But everything had an age and height requirement, and Manny wasn't tall enough to do anything good. Mountain Bear says, "You must be this tall to ride." The only activity Manny was big enough for was the fun float, where you drifted down the river in inner tubes. So that's what Mum signed us up for. I really wanted to do something more exciting like rock climbing, but Mum was dead set on it all of us doing something as a family. Mum said the fun float would be relaxing, and after we put on life jackets, we grabbed the cooler and a few other things from the camper van to take with us on the river. After our experience with the fish farm yesterday, I wasn't crazy about getting into the water again. But there was a bunch of other people doing the fun float too, and I figured if there weren't any piranhas, they would go for them before they would go for me. I'd have to admit that once we got into it, it was kind of relaxing, maybe even a little too relaxing. Roderick fell asleep while Dad answered work emails and Mum checked in with Marnie's doctor. His stools seems a little runny. Should I add more fibre to his diet? No one was really paying attention when we hit a shallow part of the river and came to a complete stop. We had to take our tubes out of the water, and it wasn't fun walking across a bunch of sharp rocks in our bare feet. Once the river got deeper, we put the tubes back into the water, but my inner tube must have got punctured in the shallow part because it was losing air. So I took Marnie's tube and we emptied the ice out of the cooler so he could use that. I thought the trip was going to take 20 minutes, but it had already been 2 hours. With no end in sight, and we really slowed down. Then we got stuck behind a big group of people jamming up in the river. I hit a warm spot in the water, and I've been through in enough baby pools to know what that meant. So when the river got wider, I paddled my tube all around those guys to try and get out of their way. Unfortunately, I went a little too far and ended up in a part of the river where the water was really rough. And in a few seconds later, I got tossed from my inner tube. It was actually pretty scary. The water was moving fast, so I pointed my feet downstream to make sure I didn't crack my head open on a rock. I called out for help, but the people around me had their music up too loud, so no one even noticed. Help! My family tried to save me, but when it turns out they're totally useless in an emergency. Up ahead, people were pulling their inner tubes out of the river in the landing area, so I tried to paddle myself over there. But the water was moving too fast and I was getting pulled downstream. My family got out of the river and Dad was yelling and pointing at something near me. That's when I saw a big branch hanging over the water and I grabbed for it. For a second, I thought everything was going to be okay. Then I noticed something drifting away from me and I realised it was my swimming shorts. A lifeguard from Adventure Centre started wading out for me with a float, and I knew I just kept hanging to the branch who'd rescue me. But all I could think of were the people in the landing area who were about to see me without my swimming shorts, and Roderick was already recording me with his phone. So I decided the best move was to let go and take my chances. Luckily, the water wasn't as rocky downstream, but it was still moving fast. By the time I was able to drag myself to the shore, I must have been 1/4 of a mile from the landing area, and I never did find my swimming shorts. But thankfully, I found the caller. Friday. Last night, everyone in my family agreed that our trip was off to a pretty terrible start, but we couldn't decide what to do next. I thought we should just admit this trip was a mistake and go back to Grandma's. But Dad said we couldn't turn around now because we hadn't done actual camping yet. Dad said there was a national forest a few hours away, and if we camped there, we could stay in one place for the rest of the trip and relax for a change. That wasn't crazy. I wasn't crazy about that off on our own, but I knew how the rest of the summer was going to play if we went back to Grandma's basement now. I didn't feel great about camping in the wilderness, but Dad said if we got any trouble, there were rangers who could help us out, and that made me feel a little bit better. So we spent the night in the car park off the Morning Adventure Centre, and first thing in the morning, we headed for the National Forest. The ranger at the entrance told us it hadn't rained in a few weeks, so the risk of a fire was really high. Then she gave Dad a map and a playmat with tips on how to camp responsibly. The forest was big, so it took a while for us to get to our pitch, and we didn't see a single human being on our way in. The pitch was actually really nice. There was a lot of space for the camper vans, and we were right next to a little stream. After we sat up and enjoyed our hammock chairs, we kicked back and enjoyed being out in the nature. At least most of us did. After a few minutes, Mum asked us what our plan was, and Dad said this was the plan. Mum said we couldn't just sit around all day, and we needed something active, like to go on a nature hike or something. But that sounded like a lot of work to us guys, especially after a long drive. So Mum said if we were going to laze around, then she was going to put our electronics in the vault for the rest of the camping trip. And that soon enough got us moving. Mum pulled out the map and found a trail that was nearby. And before we headed off to the task, Mum pulled out the map and we found a trail that was nearby. And before we headed off on the hike, she told everyone to fill up their flasks, put on bug spray. But I was a lot more worried about bears than bugs. I remember that guy at the camping store said if you saw a bear out in the nature, you could make saws to do it. You could make loads of noise to make it go away. Luckily, Uncle Gary left some pots and pans in the cupboard. So if we spotted a bear, we'll begin to start making a racket. Everyone got annoyed with me pretty quickly, and Mum told me I need to take the cookeryware back to the camper van. She said I could catch up with them further down the trail. I was actually fine with that, because the stuff was pretty heavy anyway. Plus, I started to wonder if the noise might actually attract bears, because whenever I hear pots and pans, I'm thinking dinner. After I put the crockery back in the camper van, I turned around and got back onto the trail. I thought if I hurried, it might take me 10 minutes to reconnect with everyone. But then I ran into a problem. The trail split and I didn't know which way my family went. I figured out the odds were 50-50, so I headed left. But I walked for a long time without finding them and figured I must have picked the wrong path. So I went back to the place where the fork in the trail was, and that's where I hit another snag. I was all turned around. I couldn't remember which path was the one I hadn't taken yet, which one led back to the camper van, and I couldn't tell which was because, to me, every tree and rock looked the same. That's when I started to get worried. I remembered the guy in the camping store said that sometimes bears will use human trails because it's easier than walking through the bush. So I really didn't feel good about hanging out in the middle of an in-station. I've read that bears sense the smell of 1,000 times better than a human. So when I pulled out a container of lip balm I had in my pocket, I practically started hyperventing. I decided to get off the trail and start to turn around. I was off the path. I couldn't find my way back. My mind started racing and I thought about what would happen if I got lost for good. I've read stories about humans, beings who got cut off from civilization and they were raised by wolves. I didn't know if there were any wolves in this forest, but there were plenty of squirrels. Luckily, my family found me before things could get too crazy, because in another hour or two, I might have gone too far. When we got back to camp, Mum asked Roderick to check me for ticks, since I'd been off the trail. He looked me over and told me I had a huge tick right in the middle of my back. Roderick said the tick must have been on me for a while because it looked like it was about to burst, and I almost passed out when he showed me a picture he took on his phone. It turns out it was just a joke, and the picture was something Roderick found online. But even after I knew it was a joke, I still felt like something was in the middle of my back for the rest of the day. Mum said everyone should take a shower since it had been 2 days and we were starting to stink. Roderick was first, and he was in there for at least half an hour. So it was my turn. There was no hot water left. Dad checked the propane tank and said it was empty, which meant it was cold showers from now on. No one was happy about that, especially Mum. I noticed it was really starting to stink in the bathroom, so I told Dad. He said the reason it stank was because he hadn't emptied out the sewage tank yet. To be honest with you, I didn't even think about what happened to our waste in there. Back home, when you flush the toilet, everything gets magically wished away when you flushed it. But in a camper van, you're actually carrying that stuff around with you. If I had known that beforehand, I'm sure I wouldn't have agreed on this trip. Slosh. Now I was starting to worry about what happened if the tank overloaded. So today, whenever anyone looked like they needed to go number 2, I tried them talking it into doing it somewhere else. I guess I should have been grateful we live in a time that toilets exist. Roderick told me a guy who invented the flushing toilet was named Thomas Craper, and I don't know if it's true or if it's another one of his jokes. If it's true, I hope the guy made a ton of money, because I didn't want anyone function named after me. Yo, I'm gonna take a Greg. Dad got a fire going and cooked some beef stew. He was going to serve baked beans to go with it, but Roderick left the too close to the fire, and that was the end of that. Blam! After dinner, we tied up our trash and hoisted it to a tree with a rope, just like the gold guy at camping told us in the camping store. I figured if there were any bears smart enough to get to our trash, they deserved to have it. But now it was dark, and Mum said we should turn in for the night. But Dad said the best part of camping was sitting around the fire under the stars. Then Mum got all excited. She tried to get us to join in a song that she had learnt in summer camp when she was a kid. But the rest of us aren't really sing-alongs, so we just waited for Mum to wrap it up. There's a hole in my bucket, Delisa, Delisa. After that, Dad brought out some marshmallows and we found some long sticks. While we were roasting our marshmallows over the fire, Dad got all serious. He told us a long time ago he went camping with his dad, and they met a crusty old ranger who told them a crazy story. The ranger said he used to have a beagle named Matilda, and she followed him wherever he'd go. But then, one night, the ranger made a fire and he saw a weird creature with glowing red eyes prowling around the edge of the camp. Matilda chased after the creature, and the ranger tracked her deep in the woods. But the only trace of the dog was the broken collar that laid on the ground. Dad said every night the ranger would sleep in his cabin alone, hoping Matilda would find her way back to him. And on nights, just like tonight, there would be a crescent moon, and he would hear the howl of the beagle deep in the woods. Mum wasn't happy for Dad telling the story, because Manny seemed really shook up. And to be honest, I was a little spooked too. Then I heard a sound coming from the deep in the woods that made my heart stop. Ow! For a split second, I thought it was a ghost of Matilda. But then I realised Roderick was missing. And then the whole thing was one big joke. Dad and Roderick were just playing on the rest of us. But it kind of backfired, because when Roderick howled, Manny jumped, and that's how Dad ended up with a flaming marshmallow stuck to his knee. I think Dad was about to dive into the stream and put the fire out, but luckily Roderick remembered where we kept the fire extinguisher. Mum started giving Dad a lecture about why you should never scare people, but she got cut off by a weird noise coming from the forest. At first I thought it might be another joke, but it wasn't. Dad and Roderick's eyes told me it wasn't. Snuffle grunt. Whatever was there a big and coming our way. So we piled into the camper van and locked the door behind us. Sure enough, it was a bear. But it wasn't after our trash. It was after the baked beans. Once the bear was done licking baked beans off the camper van, it wanted more. And I wish I could say we stayed calm, but I'd be lying. Ah! Dad climbed into the driver's seat to get us out of there, but the keys were by the fire, and the bear started rocking the camper van. I thought it was over for us. I guess Manny did too, because he managed to scramble out of the window and to get up to the roof with the flare gun with him. Last night the light from the flares started the bear, so when the ranger arrived to the pitch, we didn't really need to be rescued anymore. But then the biggest problem was the marshmallow burn on Dad's knee. The ranger said it was totally reckless of us to shoot off a flare just because of that. It could have started a forest fire. Then she said we were going to have to leave the park first thing in the morning. Well, that was fine with me. We lasted one night in the wilderness, and I don't think we could survive another. Vroom! When we left the park this morning, I was really looking forward to get back to Grandma's basement. I knew we would have plenty of hot water and no bears. But Mum wasn't ready to go back home just yet. She said the reason we had a bad time camping was because we were too isolated, and if people went to a place where there were other people, we'd have more fun. Mum told us she'd heard of these campsites where we have all sorts of activities for families, and everything you need is one place. Then she started looking up nearby campsites and found one that had Ponytail. Welcome to Paradise, Campers Eden, luxury campsite. 42 arcades of well-manicured grounds off the highway. Abominations for the buggies. Affordable family fun, pet-friendly. Check out our swimming pool. What caught my eye was luxury. After getting a taste of a real campsite, it was ready for something more unmarket. I knew from Sunday school that Eden was another word for paradise, so that sounded promising. The way I remembered it, Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden Eden because one of them was tempted to eat an apple from a forbidden tree. If it was me, I wouldn't have given up paradise for a piece of fruit. I would have had to been for something good, like cake. It took us most of the day to get to Campers Eden, but when we crossed the bridge and got our first look at the place, I could see why they named it the way they did. We pulled up to the lodge and went inside, where a member of staff told us about the awesome stuff they had at the campsite, like games room and a pool and sand pits, plus the lake with canoes and kayaks. There were also shower block, where you could take the hottest shower, which was the thing Mum was most excited about. What I liked was that each pitch had its own sewer hookup. The inside of our camper van was starting to smell like a monkey house, and I was really looking forward to our sewage tank getting flushed out. Mum told the member of staff we'd like to pitch with a lake view, but the woman told Mum that people booked those way ahead of time, and that the only spots were in the economy lot. I guess Mum was focused on that hot shower, so she said we would take whatever they had. And after we paid up for a week, we drove to the camper van to the hill to find our pitch. The further down the hill we went, the smaller pitches got. And when we found our spot, Dad could barely fit the camper van onto the concrete pad. After we parked, Mum unloaded the camper van chairs while Dad tried to figure out how to flush the sewage tank. I wanted to be as far away as possible when that process started, so I told Mum and Dad I was going off to explore the campsite. I wanted to check out the games room, so that's where I went first. There was a few arcade machines in there, but nothing I was really interested in playing. Blam blam, Dough Hunter. They had a few pool tables, but from what I could tell, they didn't have any actual balls. I checked out the swimming pool next, and that was kind of a disappointment too. It was full of little kids and their parents weren't even keeping an eye on them. Nowadays, kids wear those floaty vests, so they don't even have to learn to swim. It's not like that when I was growing up. You just had to learn the hard way. Swim! Some of the little kids drifted out to the deep end, which was a problem because people were doing cannonballs off the high board. There was no lifeguard on duty, so everyone was pretty much doing whatever they wanted. I didn't really feel safe going into the pool, so I decided to relax in the hot tub instead. But that's when I found out this place wasn't joking about the pet-friendly thing. There was a snack shack in the pool area, and the latrine shower block were close by. I wanted to kill a little bit more time before I went back to our campsite in case Dad wasn't done emptying our sewage tank. So I explored some of the other pictures to see what they were like. The nicest ones were Dulex pictures that overlooked the stream. Those peoples had satellite dishes and fancy barbecues, and they had actual lawns to take care of. I could tell the Dulex campsite people didn't like us economy guys hanging around in their properties, so I didn't stick around for long. The spots further down the hill weren't as nice, but each row was kind of like its own little neighbourhood. One of the rows had a bunch of older people in it. I'm guessing that was the area for the retirees. A few rows down, there were a family with little kids. Some of the rows had themes, and people went kind of crazy with the decorations. A few people didn't have full-size camper vans, and I felt grateful that Uncle Gary had left one of those instead. Some other people didn't have camper vans at all. There were ones in the area that looked like they had a full motorcycle gang in it, and I was glad we didn't end up as neighbours with those guys. But it might have been worse if we had ended up in a pet-friendly row, because that area was a total zoo. Bark, bark, chirp, ruff, ruff, meow. I could tell when I getting closer to the economy row because the pictures were packed and a whole lot tighter, and people had to make the most of their space. But when I got back to our pitch, Dad was cooking hot dogs on the barbecue. I wanted to ask him if he washed his hands after doing the sewage hookup, but I thought he might get annoyed with me. Mum was trying to get to know some of the neighbours, but they seemed like type of people who like to keep to themselves. Once Dad was done cooking, we sat down at our own picnic table to eat, but the people on the other side of us were playing beanbag toss from their roof, and somebody had really lousy aim. Well, that was enough to get us While we were cleaning up the mess, I told Dad I thought coming here might have been a mistake, but Mum said sometimes it's hard getting used to a new place, and I just needed to give it a chance. But when she reminded me that we haven't even visited the lake yet, which should be the best part, I got about something else. When I got interrupted by a noise coming from the main lodge direction. Whee! It sounded like one of those air raid sirens you hear in a war movie when the enemy bombs are approaching, and it put me in totally on the edge. Our next door neighbours seemed very nervous too, so they gathered up all their stuff to take inside the camper van. When Dad asked what the siren was for, our neighbour said it meant there was a skunk on the property and everyone needed to get inside in a hurry. Well, that was enough to get us moving. We shut the door and peeked out of the window while we waited. Sure enough, a few minutes later, a skunk came sniffing around our pitch. It got up on the picnic table, and when it started eating our hot dogs, there was nothing we could do but watch. Once the skunk was done eating, it left. After a while, the siren stopped and everyone came back outside. And even though the skunk was gone, the pitch smelt terrible. Dad said the reason it smelt so bad was because there was some sort of chemicals in skunks' glands that people could smell from a mile away. And he said if you've got sprayed by a skunk, it would be 1,000 times worse. Thousands of times worse. He said the best thing to do if you ran into a skunk was to back away slowly, because a skunk would only spray a person if it feels like it's concerned or threatened. He said, you know you're about to be sprayed by a skunk if a skunk stands on its front legs and wriggles its butt at you. But by then it's probably too late. Roderick said that skunk spray doesn't just smell bad, it's flammable too. I don't know if that's true or another one of his lies. If it is true, then once skunks figured out how to light matches, us humans would be in big trouble. When God created the animals and gave them cool stuff to defend themselves, like shells and talons and claws, but when the time came to create people, all his good ideas were used up. Good luck. I guess God made it up by giving us brains, but if it was up to me, I'd probably gone with quills. I'd figure the smell of a skunk could scare off predators by smelling bad, but maybe it would work for me, and that's when I decided I'm not going to shower until I finish high school. I probably shouldn't have told Mum my plan, though, because all it did was remind her that I skipped taking a shower today, so now she's making me take one first thing tomorrow morning. Luckily, I had a few extra hot dogs in the camper van, and Dad cooked them over the fire. But I kept thinking about the skunk, so I was a little jumpy when all of a sudden we got sprayed. But it wasn't a skunk that sprayed us. It was one of our neighbours. Apparently 9 o'clock is lights out at camp, and I guess people around here take it seriously. So we turned in and went to sleep for the night. It's Sunday. It turned out the whole camp was early to rise. We didn't even need to set our alarm clocks because our neighbours let us know when it was time to get up. Believe it or not, some guy was doing wood carvings on his pitch. I wanted to give him a piece of my mind, but when I saw the chainsaw, I figured maybe I could let it slide just this time. After Dad got out of bed, he started cooking pancakes and eggs on the grill. Mum was just getting back from the shower block, and she gave me the scoop on how things worked up there. She said you had to pay for the shower with coins and gave me a few. Then she told me that I needed to stop by the laundry and move our clothes from the washer to the dryer. I really didn't like the idea of taking a shower in a public building. When you live in a house with your family, in the bathroom, they're the only place you can get privacy. So when I'm in there, I'm in my own little world. And once that door's locked, I can do anything I want. Are you almost done in there? I'm flossing. But sometimes I get myself into trouble in the bathroom. Once I almost broke my ribs when I was pretending to be Spider-Man in the shower. Ah! When I arrived at the shower block, the line was already wrapped round the building, and I got to know my fellow campers a little better than I wanted to. I figured the line was split at the entrance. The guys would go one way and the girls would go the other. But it turns out this place didn't have those kind of boundaries. I found out the reason the wait was so long because there was only 3 shower stalls. When I was finally my turn, I put 25 cents in the coin slot and the stall door, and that got the shower going. The hot water felt good, especially since I hadn't had a hot shower in a few days. But I couldn't really enjoy it since the stalls only went so high. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend I was by myself, but that was kind of hard to do when the person in the stall next to you was kind of chatty. Is that raspberry silk shampoo? I decided to wrap things up and get out of there, but the shower stopped before I had a chance to rinse shampoo out my hair. It turns out 25 cents only paid for 3 minutes of hot water. I tried to hand the person in line a coin to put in the slot, but I couldn't get his attention. So I stepped out of the shower, put the coin in myself, but guess what? Just the opportunity this guy was waiting for. And what really stunk was when he started using my shampoo. I didn't feel like getting into an argument with a naked guy, so I left, but some soap buds got into my eye and I could barely see where I was going. Luckily, I found my way to the laundry, where there was a sink and the water was free. Once I'd finished rinsing the shampoo off my hair, I started looking for our clothes, but someone had taken them out of the washing machine and dumped them on the floor, so they could put their clothes in. After I put our clothes in the dryer, I decided I wasn't going to stick around the washing machines and find out who dumped our stuff on the floor. When they came back to get theirs, but I saw who it was, I thought maybe I could let things slide just one more time. When we got back to our pitch, all I wanted to do was crawl back into bed, but Mum said we were going down to the lake. I needed to put on my swimming shorts. I reminded her that I didn't have any swimming shorts, and I was hoping that would get me off the hook. But Mum said Roderick had a spare pair, and I even thought I'm not a fan of wearing someone else's clothes. I knew there was no point on debating about it. I figured we'd splash around in the lake for a good few minutes and acted like we were having a good time. Mum would be satisfied and let us go back to camp, but she took our camera with her, and that was always complicated things. This summer, Mum's been spending a lot of time on social media, and whenever she sees how perfect her friends' families looks, it makes her feel jealous. So Mum's always puts us in these awkward poses to make it look like we were having a good time, too. But something's wrong with my family because we can never get our act together. The lake looked calm and peaceful when we first saw it from the bridge, but today it was a whole different scene. I was expecting the lake to be clear like the one at Fish Hardry, but it looked dirty to me. And the problem, probably because people weren't using it just for swimming. I thought people were acting kind of nuts at the pool yesterday, but the lake was a whole different level. There was a rope string attached to a big tree that went over the water, but I wasn't planning on using it. That thing useless. It rained for a few days. There was some rafts floating in the middle of the lake, and I thought about grabbing one, but I changed my mind when I saw how people were using them. There was the ramp at the bottom of the big hill by the lake. I could tell what that was for, but my question got answered when some kids launched himself into the water in the tractor's tire. Mum wanted us all to swim, but I was pretty scared from my last experience lake. Plus, I didn't trust the water I couldn't see through. There was something weird sticking up in the middle of the lake, and I pointed it out to Dad. He said it was probably just a branch, but it didn't look like a branch to me. And when you see part of something, it could be anything. Nobody else was in the mood to swim either, so we put our stuff down on the ground. But it turned out the lake shore wasn't the same as the beach shore. And within a few seconds we were sinking into the muck. Mum said we weren't going back to the pitch until we'd done something fun. There was a canoe tied up to the dock, and she said we should take it out on the water. I was fine with being on the top of the water, as long as we didn't have to go in it. We took turns getting into the canoe, which wasn't easy, as I thought it would be. I stayed low, just like Dad told me to. Roderick didn't, though. We almost capsized while we were still tied to the dock. Gah! After we were all in the canoe, we put on life jackets and paddled onto the water. But some people swimming nearby seemed like they were in a hurry to get away. Then we found out why. As soon as we got to the middle of the lake, something big was landed right next to our canoe, and a second later there was another splash. Some teenagers up on a hill had turned a hammock into a giant slingshot, and they were using us for target practice. I guess that explained why no one was using the canoe. We tried to paddle back to the dock, but the guys on the hill were getting more accurate each shot. I guess Roderick didn't want to get hit, so he decided to abandon the ship, and that was a problem for the rest of us, because now we were unbalanced. Our canoe capsized, and somehow me and Dad ended up underneath it. At first I thought it was a good thing, since we were protected from the watermelons. But I changed my mind when we took a direct hit, because it was like being inside of a drum. Clonk. Me and Dad ditched the canoe and swam for the dock, and we had to move fast because now they were out of range, so the guys on the hill were skipping their shots. We pulled ourselves safely onto the dock where we were safe, but Mum was upset her camera was ruined, but I didn't really want my picture taken right away. I think Mum realised we had a little much too family time yesterday, because this morning she said everyone could go do their own thing. I was planning on relaxing for once, but Mum had other ideas. She said camp was full of other kids my age, and this was a perfect opportunity to branch out and make new friends. I told Mum I wasn't really in a mood for socialising and making new friends. I'd never even seen any of these people again. But Mum said some of her best friends to this day were people she met on summer camp when she was my age. I told Mum it's a difference from when she was growing up, and it's a lot harder to make friends with strangers nowadays, but Mum said she could help me with that. I was hoping Mum would just pass by, and before I could stop her, Mum started introductions. I know someone who would love to join in your summertime fun. I recognised a few of them from the pool, and on our way down to the stream, I learned their names. Everyone was calling the smartest kid Juicebox, and he seemed to be the one in charge. The kid with the inner tube was Big Marcus, and I couldn't tell if he was wearing that thing for fun or if he actually couldn't get out of it. The tall, skinny one was called Weevil. The boy with the shaved head was called Doodoo. I don't want to be mean or anything, but that boy really lived up the nickname. A few other kids joined us. They all had nicknames too, so I guess that was the thing around here. Five-Head Clutter Regular Marcus. Juicebox asked me my name, And I figured since everyone else was making up names, I might as well too. Jimmy Dougfish. So guys, I'm gonna end it there. If you want to get your book now. Because there's loads of copies. Yeah, hope you have a good time. Stay safe. Go get your book, because it was quite an interesting book from the description that I read to you. I read a lot of pages. So I hope you enjoyed. Stay safe, like and subscribe.